While there is a world trend on the inclusion of persons with disability in this complex society, the rights of a disabled person in developing countries, particularly in India, are almost non existent, where the rights of a girl or a woman are also vulnerable. Women and girls with disability thus face twice the discrimination. Shanta Memorial Rehabilitation Center, a credible disabled persons organization (DPO) based in Orissa, India, along with Development Research Institute presents e-courses to increase knowledge on gender issues focusing on gender-based violence against women with disabilities, living independently and inclusion in the society from a human rights perspective. This web based course is titled Insidious Violence and Women with Disabilities. This academic endeavor was designed keeping in mind the COVID 19 restrictions and the shift of focus from classroom lectures to a virtual learning environment.
Good morning, everyone. And today we'll be discussing on the rights to live independently and in the community and deinstitutionalization. We don't want women with disability to be institutionalized. They should stay in the community with their family or independently in the society and the community. Today morning it is Deepa Sonpal. She's a disability activist and she's a social development researcher and educator with 30 years of experience. She holds a MA in social work from the Tata Institution of Social Science, Mumbai, worked with Unnati Organization for Development Education for 28 years on various projects related to the social inclusion of vulnerable section, in particular persons with disabilities. Leadership and government governance, improving access to public schemes for the most vulnerable section, reaching the last miles. Then building of disability persons organization, DPOs, and disability inclusive disaster risk reduction, that is DIDRR, have published a number of articles and book chapters in national and international publication, currently supporting a couple of NGOs for mainstreaming disabilities. And now I would request Deepa to do her presentation.
The speaker of this web course is social development researcher and educator Deepa Sonpal from India, speaking on Women with Disabilities' Rights to Live Independently and Deinstitutionalization Process.
Thank you, Asha ji and Reena, for this opportunity. And I would love to have your feedback also later on my presentation. So, the topic for today is how women with disabilities have the right to live independently in the community and the deinstitutionalization process, what it entails. So, we go to the next slide, Reena. What are the legal frameworks that we have for this? I'm sure you all have got inputs on this in depth. So I just briefly mention them. We have the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which was declared after the Second World War for world peace, humanity, and dignity. And particularly for rights of persons with disabilities, we have UNCRPD, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, we have the Indian Constitution, in particular Article 41 and the fundamental rights. We also have the Criminal Amendment Act 2013 that has also articulated a bit on violence against women with disabilities. And of course, lastly, but the most important one is the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. So the next slide, you all have got input on UNCRPD, and you know that there are 50 articles, but when I was looking at it again from this perspective, and I felt that some of these articles need to be reiterated, in the sense that if we are talking about deinstitutionalization and we are talking about the right to live independently, these are very important. So, preamble, of course, because it talks about equality as human beings on an equal basis with others. And then we have these definitions which are particularly related to disability. One of them is communications, and you can see that we also have a sign language interpreter with us on this presentation. Then there are other means of communication. So whichever means of communication may be important, that is to be adopted. There's language, there is discrimination, there is universal design and reasonable accommodation. So I'm not getting into it, but if anybody wants to talk more, we can take it up later. Then in particular, we have women and girls with disabilities. That is Article 6 and Article 7 on children with disabilities. Article 8 is on awareness, which is particularly important because there is very low awareness on women with psychosocial disabilities and how one could address to their needs. And then we go to the next slide, Reena. Article 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 are basically on legal capacity, how women with disabilities or any person with disability has the legal capacity and equality before the law. And then we have Article 18, 19, and 20, which talks about living independently in the community with dignity. Now we go to the next slide, and it has those articles which will enable people to live with dignity in the community as contributing members of society. So these are respect for family, education, health, habitation and rehabilitation, work and employment, and important is adequate standard of living and social security and protection, because without which one is not able to live in the community with dignity. If you are not a contributing member of society, then people will not be treating you on an equal basis. And then the paucity of statistics and data collection. We go to the next slide. In 2019, the CRPD mandates that every 5 years governments have to make reports and send to the CRPD committee on the progress made on the implementation of UNCRPD. And at the same time, there are shadow reports which are prepared by the civil society and NGOs. And in 2019, the Women with Disabilities India Network had gone and also presented as the shadow report on Article 6, that is on women with disabilities. And there were a couple of other civil society organizations who had presented on other articles. So based on the hearing from the government and from the civil society organization, the CRPD committee comes out with recommendations to the government. And one of their recommendations, and of course in other articles also they have mentioned, but this particularly on living independently and being included in the community, they had 3 recommendations. So this I would like to read out as it is from what is there in the document. The first one says, end all forms of institutions based on disability, repeal legislation providing the establishment of institutions for persons with severe disabilities, and adopt a deinstitutionalization strategy with appropriate financial, human, and technical resources and a time frame, which is very important, in consultation with organizations of persons with disabilities, prioritizing deinstitutionalized of children from all types of institutions. So the committee is very clearly saying that we must have a time-bound plan to deinstitutionalize persons with severe disabilities who are most likely to be institutionalized. Next slide. The second recommendation is provide personal assistance and strengthen community support networks, facilitating social inclusion and individualized support. And this is very important, but when we saw during the COVID, these support systems were not there. Even the guidelines that were issued by the Disaster Management Authority and the State Disaster Management Authority did not consider how support could be extended to persons with disabilities. And one of the norms is during the COVID is social distancing. Now, how is that possible for somebody who is a person with disability and requires support? The kind of support that may be required is for personal care and assistance at the home. And because of the lockdown, people were not able to get the assistance to travel to their home and assist them. Second kind of assistance is to get access to services. One needs to go to the bank, one needs to go and get their food stuff, and even online deliveries were not working. So there were no transport that was working. So how does one get access to these? So even I personally had a lot of difficulty because I live with elderly parents, and who will go out to buy the stuff? If I go out, I need support to at least cross the road and move about in the traffic. Because even though they said there is lockdown, there were some individuals who were coming out with their vehicles to shop, and it was difficult. So what we decided is, since my dad has asthma, mom would come with me, and so both of us went out. Now, how to carry all that stuff and come back? So while we were crossing the road, mom fell down, and there was no way I could lift her up because I don't have strength to lift her up. So we had to call somebody to assist her. So no social distance we could maintain. So there is very much required a human support where persons with disabilities are considered in our country, because if you see, accessibility is one important element, access to the built environment. But you may have seen that we have very poor access to the built environment because of the way our country is and the position we are in. And of course, there is non-implementation of the act and the guidelines, and it's a Herculean task, and it may take quite some time before we have that in place. And the third is adapt a strategy and indicators of progress concerning access by persons with disabilities to mainstream community service, removing the barriers for women with intellectual or psychological disabilities, in particular in accessing public services such as housing, inclusive education, work, and employment. So these were the three major recommendations that the committee has given, the UNCRPD committee has given to our state, that is to our country's government. So next slide. Now the second most important legal provision that we have, in fact, this will be the first because it is the act of our country. So similarly, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 has a lot of definitions, and they have adapted some of the definitions from the UNCRPD. Then we have a long chapter, which is chapter 2 on rights and entitlements. And in our country, because we have a large number of the population living in rural areas and from poor communities, access to basic services and entitlements and government schemes is a very, very important aspect. And it has very clearly articulated about women and children with disabilities, on community rights, on protection from cruelty and human treatment, treatment from abuse, violence, exploitation, including prevention through awareness raising, protection and safety in situations of conflict, emergencies, and disasters. Next slide. Then also it mentions about home and family for children with disabilities. It mentions about reproductive rights. It also mentions about access to justice and legal capacity, but it doesn't offer full legal capacities. It has limited guardianship provision. Now also it has articles, especially chapter 3 on education, 4 on skill development, 5 on social security, health and rehabilitation. This is mainly for people with benchmark disabilities. Next slide. Then there is special provision for persons with high support need and an awareness campaign. Article 40 to 46 talked about access to the built environment, access to information, goods and services. And there is a special chapter which talks about special court and special prosecutor in enabling access to justice with persons with disabilities. And a very important section is on offenses and penalties that include fine and imprisonment. So these were the legal provisions that we have. And I believe you all have also had some inputs on this, on the status of institutions in India. So again, I will not go on in depth, but we know that there are unhealthy living conditions in these institutions. There are forced treatment and denial of adequate and appropriate health care within these institutions. Next slide, we can move on to. So, this is from basically a study that was carried out by Human Rights Watch. And the third issue that they flagged off was violence and exploitation. And the fourth issue was access to justice. So this study is available, so one could look at it in depth. We'll go to slide number 13. This also, I believe you all have got some inputs on. So we would look at disability from 4 models, and the 4 models are the charity and the medical model, the welfare model. The second one is the medical model. The social is, the third is the social, and the fourth is rights-based approach. And you know that the UNCRPD and the rights of persons with disabilities in many ways have taken us from the medical model to the social and rights-based model, but it has incorporated elements of the charity and the medical model also, in the sense that it still certifies disability to be 40%. It still talks about institutions for persons with disabilities where you register these organizations. So the level at which we are in a country, we are combining all the 4 models to approach disability, but also providing them rights in terms of access to justice, in terms of creating supportive disabled people's organizations to support and to enable them in exercising their legal capacity, and so on and so forth. So we are using these models in combination. Now, before we before we move on to the next slide, if we could get some chat responses, is it possible to get some responses on the chat? Reena? So I would like to ask.
Checking the chat.
Okay, so I'll ask the question. Now, my question was that according to you, what do you think are the needs of women with disabilities? If some of you could just write them down in a sentence or in a few words. According to you, what do you think are the needs of women with disabilities?
There is one response.
Yes.
Someone has asked healthy laws enforcing agency, including accessible institutions.
Right.
And
But what I was asking is, this is fine, but what do you think is the need as a person, as a human being? Laws is fine, that's a broad one.
there's another one. which says, I feel it is important to define living independently, as many people mistake it. No, this is not. Yeah, there is Deep Shikha, social dignity along with equal right to education and engagement in different fields.
Right.
Another
Very
one
nice.
again that said awareness, sensitiveness of the people. Another one said compassion and empathy. There's another one with communication and developing social relations. Then they need to achieve the equal enjoyment of all human rights and required development.
So these are in general. I'm asking in particular, if you could name, maybe if you consider that Deepa is a person with disabilities, what is it that I need? These are all at a conceptual level. In practical life and everyday life, what is it that I need? So these are fine, definitely these are fine, but I was trying to get to daily life. If you could really think, assistance, okay,
One said that it should be addressed on the nature of disability.
right. But what? Which specific need is what I'm trying to ask. Technical accessibility and care. Which kind of, okay, household, inclusion in society and accessibility to public and private space. These are still generic. I'm still asking if you could talk about basic needs in daily life. What do I need?
Maybe give them an example.
Okay, I need a computer. I need a computer that is accessible. I need food. I need good air. I need water. Is this what I'm talking about? But what is it that I need? Health and education. Stigma management, somebody has written. Cooperation and affection. Okay, so basically, okay, there's some one more response. Live with economical strong. Somebody has written this, live with economical strong. Would you like to clarify? You can unmute and say.
इकोनॉमिकली स्ट्रांग मींस मैम कि माने आप आर्थिक रूप से मजबूत हो, माने आप सेल्फ डिपेंडेंट हो, किसी के ऊपर इकोनॉमिकली डिपेंड ना हो. दैट इज द आई थिंक दैट इज मैन फॉर
राइट राइट, सही बात है. थैंक यू. तो और दूसरा रिस्पॉन्स है, लाइक मेट्रो एंड बस सर्विस शुड बी मेड एक्सेसिबल टू देम, लाइक दिल्ली मेट्रो हैज डन अ गुड जॉब. ओके. And somebody has written, Vineet has written in this aspect. In which aspect? In the above, in the Delhi, in the serve accessible transport. Okay. Then financial independence. Yeah, financially dependent and decision making. So now if I ask you the next question, are these needs any different from the needs that you may have? I assume that most of you are not persons with or women with disabilities. Basic needs like food, water, as per the constitution. So you can unmute and also talk. Are these needs any different from the needs of non-disabled people? Yes, their basic needs
are equal to non-disabled people.
Right. Right. So what is the difference? Yes. These are just that any common people have. So what is the difference? Is there any difference? जी बोलिए. Just accessibility, okay. Equal treatment should be given to all. No.
I might
Equality.
have some little bit support to do my daily activities based on my impairment.
Right. Wonderful. Anything else?
Yes, yeah. Hi, I'm Kalyani here from South India.
Yeah, just a bit louder. Your voice is very
Yeah,
low.
yeah. Is it fine now, ma'am?
Yes, fine.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, each and every person they have a different needs according to their impairment. So
Right.
there are modification, adaptations needs to be done according to that.
Right.
Yeah. So this is what I wanted to say.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Ma'am, good morning. Am I audible?
Good morning.
Ma'am, actually, this law enforcing agency, these things actually, I have given the illustration on offenses against women with disabilities, how it can be handled. So now what happened if you look at any woman, for example, hearing impaired or visually impaired, if the law enforcing agency, because first instance, they have to narrate the situation to the police.
Right.
Or even medical examiner. If they are unable to cope up, for example, some hearing impaired women actually experience this. They are unable to communicate what they want to communicate. Though law is there, but the enforcing agency is not sensitized. So that's supposed to be done. So this is I would like to highlight based on this their specific needs.
Okay, that is fine. So you actually introduced a very nice word, which I would have liked to also talk about, is specific.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So it is most of the times we are using the word special, which makes as if people with disabilities require some special attention. But we just saw in our discussion that the needs of all human beings are the same, whether disabled or non-disabled. But we have differences, which may be bodily differences, which may be cultural differences, which may be differences of language, right? So as per these differences, we will have to adapt to the requirements and needs of that particular person or as per the particular impairment. We agree to all that, right? So now this has formed the basis for our understanding, and we move on to the next slide. So we are at slide number 14. So now we talk about community-based rehabilitation as a strategy for rehabilitation. Somebody had asked a question where they were saying that we need to clarify what living independently means, whether it means living alone or whether it means living in the community. And once we run through the rest of the presentation, maybe it will be clear. If not, you could ask the same thing again. So I would look at the factors that would aid us in facilitating community-based rehabilitation as a strategy. First is the cultural and religious traditions that we have in South Asia and India. We are very much influenced by our religion and culture. And you know that lot of people with disabilities are still living in the community. It's thus that it doesn't get noticed or it doesn't get revealed because of the stigma attached to it. So how can we leverage on this tradition and the background that our religion offers us? That is one that will aid us in this process. Second is we have WHO guidelines on community-based rehabilitation, and I will talk a bit in detail about it in the next slide. Of course, we have legal provisions. So we looked at UNCRPD and we looked at the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, and no person legally can be pushed into an institution beyond their willingness. So that is clear. Now, the next point I would like to explain a bit is on the cost effectiveness. And even the World Report on Disability has highlighted that how many, now if you have any idea, could you tell me how many institutions do we have for people with disabilities in a district or in a state? Any idea? Does anybody have an idea?
One DDRC at the district level.
Yeah, that is not an institution. That is like an OPD, isn't it? DDRC is like an
Yes.
OPD.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
talking about residential institutions. How many do we have per state or district?
May not have anything in some
Yeah,
districts.
right, right. So if we want to take the paths of institutionalizing people with disabilities, and as per the census, it says we have around 2 crores persons with disabilities. And actually, it should be 15% as per the WHO report. So that number is very high. But of course, not everybody may need to be institutionalized. But if we set up institutions to hold these persons for lifetime, it will be a very costly affair, isn't it? At the same time, if we use that part of that financial resources to facilitate community-based rehabilitation, then on the long run, it will be more cost effective, is what I meant. And also sustainable in the sense that you would have a lot of community support systems that would enable people with disabilities to access their services and live life independently. And it will be inclusive. It offers more dignity and it offers scope to enable persons with disabilities to be citizens. Citizens are not that only access rights. What else do citizens need to do as citizens? Does anybody have any idea? What are the role of a citizen? Would anybody like to say? We all are citizens. So what do you think is our role?
Contribute significantly towards national development as well?
Yes, thank you. Any other? Give more concrete examples, but this is fine.
Voting rights?
Yeah, that is fine. Voting rights. What else?
Contesting rights.
Okay. Contesting elections. Then beyond that?
Participation in all activities.
Like, for example?
Maybe in cultural activities, social activities, development activities, education.
Right. Right.
Ma'am, I would like to go one step ahead also. Taking
Yes.
part in that is public hearing, they have to be given equal opportunity to take part in the public hearing.
True.
Of all events or all acts or for that matter, all the policies which are affecting either directly or indirectly, they have to be a part.
So this is basically you're talking about social accountability, right?
Yes.
And demanding social
Yes.
accountability.
Yes, demand for social accountability. Yes.
Right. Wonderful. Yes. Anybody else?
Getting the opportunity for equal rights and opportunities so that they can also shine with whatever capabilities they have, like anybody else.
Right.
Not being treated as somebody who's different, who cannot contribute or something like that. So being treated equally.
Okay. Yes, there's somebody else.
Ma'am, our right or our actions must.
I think, yeah, ma'am. I think citizens exercise their rights and freedoms and get benefited from the democratic setup. Also, people they must consider others' needs and interests as well.
Yes. You can give an example. Yes, can you think of an example? Somebody else was also mentioning.
Ma'am, I was telling that our actions must not, we should see that our actions must not disturb others as well.
Okay. But can you say example? Like I was asking, the question was, what makes a citizen? Deepshika has written, not being stereotypical and equality, just have concern of overall development and more representation in public offices. Okay, yes.
Ma'am, right to movement, right to free movement, and right to trade. That is trade and business. Take part in the trade and business. So these are all basic things. Even right to education, whatever the rights actually available to everyone, supposed to be available. So this is what. Okay. So here, with regard to disabilities, though movement we are telling the right is there, but whether they are actually able to move freely, that is $1 million questions. Barriers are there. So so similarly, access to elections. Though electoral rights they have been given, but everyone is able to do that exercise, that is not possible. So there are barriers similar to jobs and even similar to business as well. Even taking loans, even if you see the policies, insurance policies, if you see that there are some disparities, so they are not considered as citizens. So those rights which are actually there on the paper, but if you look at the practicality, it is those rights are actually not available to the citizens. Even if you say that banking services, it is available to everyone, but if you look at the disabilities, it is not available.
Right. Thank you so much. Now somebody has written, when person gets opportunity and responsibility. So what are the responsibilities as citizens? Could you name a few? Of course, some have come up in terms of voting and standing for election, taking part in the governance process, raising accountability.
Economic contribution?
Economic contribution, yes. So as citizens, we are not only asking for things, we are also contributing fundamental duties under the Constitution. Okay. So as citizens, we are also contributing members. And to be able to do that, if community-based rehabilitation is facilitated, then the person is able to participate more actively. Provided, of course, we have the other rights in place in terms of accessibility, communication, reasonable accommodation. All these factors will also need to be considered before the person is able to actively contribute and participate. So we will go to the next part of the presentation, slide number 15, and we will look at the challenges in community-based rehabilitation. So first we looked at the legal provisions, and we see that there are enough legal provisions that enable to facilitate the process of enabling people with disabilities settle in communities and live independently. And we do not have the extensive wherewithal either to set up institutions. So the right choice is to facilitate community-based rehabilitation. Now, the first challenge on community-based rehabilitation that I have put down here, there are no studies, but I have listed these from my own experience. And while I was studying, I was very intrigued by the anti-psychiatry movement, and I read up a lot. And the anti-psychiatry movement that came up in the 18th and 19th century in the West, it basically said that people are being institutionalized because there was a lot of knowledge that was gained on the medical front, and to exercise power on a certain group of people who were not abiding by the norms of society. So this theory of madness came into being, and the whole institutional setup also began to grow. So we borrowed that in terms of our theory and integrated it into a society that was more community based. I'm not nowhere saying that the community based society, that the place it was offering to vulnerable sections, which not only includes people with disabilities, including people with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities, but also for the Dalits, also for women, also from minority community, it was oppressive. But at the same time, it probably was not as worse as it is in an institution. So the notion of the normal that came up during this phase, where the anti-psychiatry movement also was born, it was challenging this notion of normal. What is normal? In fact, if you read some of the works, they're questioning the normal. So if we also look at our own lives, when we become teenagers, there are many things which we may not then want to listen to our parents to, and we may want to react, we may not want to agree to their viewpoints. And at that time, there is conflict within the house. So if that conflict comes in a big way, the person gets classified as abnormal. Anything that doesn't fit into the social norms, it becomes abnormal. The other challenging factor is that we have a highly patriarchal and stratified society. So we have this nexus of gender, caste, class, religious ethnicity that complicate the situation of disability in the community and the kind of access to services that people with disabilities may have. Then the next point is acceptance of mental health issues by all stakeholders. Now, if you see in this current situation in the pandemic, a large number of people are affected due to stress and anxiety. And if this is not addressed, it can finally lead to mental health issues. So we do not work on preventing mental health issues or on the general mental health of the community. Our focus is more on the bodily diseases and the impairments. Then if people with disabilities who are already institutionalized, if they need to be brought back into the community, then a lot of acceptance needs to be created to bring them back within the community, because people are not used to dealing with them. So if I am not used to something, definitely there will be resistance. But if I am used to something from the very beginning, then I get acclimatized automatically. Then rightly said, a lot of people have mentioned about these barriers in the environment. And one more additional factor that I would like to add is how persons with disabilities are also viewing themselves and their self-concept. So we need to work on the self-concept of people with disabilities, build their confidence that they can live in the community and be contributing members. So next slide. Then this all of you have also talked about, so I don't think we need to talk much about it, but there's low awareness on the rights of persons with disabilities among the disabled themselves as well as the community. There are low literacy levels. People with disabilities, they need to be accommodated into the community and live in the community. Then gainful employment is very important, because if we are not contributing economically, we may not be viewed as an equal person or with dignity. This also a lot of people have mentioned, and I would like to highlight that most people with disabilities do not even have a voting card. And I have asked many times in the field that if you have a disability certificate, do you have a voter ID? So whichever organizations I facilitate, I insist that if you're getting disability certificate for people with disabilities, please get an voter ID also, because that is something which makes them citizens of this country. So most organizations stop the buck at getting them their disability certificate, the UDID and some schemes, and that's it. But if we want people with disabilities to enter and enjoy the political rights, the first step is to get access to their voter ID, and the second step is to enable them to go and vote. The third step would be to enable them to understand what the candidates they are voting for is going to offer, and of course, the next steps would be to contest for elections. And for that, we will need constitutional probably revision where like the others, Dalit and tribals, there is reservations for people with disabilities to contest election within the local bodies. But there are several cases of persons with disabilities contesting as sarpanches and ward punches for their villages, and they have done outstanding and challenging work. So we have these as anecdotal case studies. Then I had mentioned low representation in governance, and somebody here rightly mentioned about public hearing and social accountability. Unless I have representation, unless unless I am counted as the member of the Ward Sabha or the Gram Sabha and my voice is raised about the difficulties that I may be facing, then it's very less likely that any of my issues will be heard. So for me to have a voice, I must have a voter ID, I must be a vote bank, and I must be able to bring my issues to at least the ward level, if not to a public hearing. Urbanization is a big challenge because the community-based rehab that we are talking about, which has emanated from the joint family system, that is disintegrating. And once people move to city, they themselves live in squatters and shanty apartments and shanty huts, and they may not be in a position to house persons with disabilities with them. And there is, of course, the rising informal sector due to globalization and rising unemployment. So these are some of the challenges I felt were there to community-based rehabilitation. And there may be many more, but I didn't do it as a study, I did it as from my own experience. We go to slide number 17, that is the background to the CBR guidelines. The CBR, the discussion globally on CBR as community-based rehabilitation began in 1978. And in 2003, this position paper was made, and our international bodies like ILO, UNESCO, and WHO, they proposed that we must move to community-based rehabilitations for persons with disabilities globally. So what is CBR? Is a strategy for rehabilitation, equalization of opportunity, poverty reduction, and social inclusion of people with disabilities. And in the same year, the World Health Assembly, that is 2003, has adopted this resolution to promote and strengthen community-based rehabilitation programs. We go to slide number 18. What are the objectives of these? So the CBR guidelines were prepared and published, and we have several manuals, and these were published in 2010. So prior to that, there is a lot of experience in CBR, and the CBR guidelines have been framed in consultation with people with disabilities, their organizations who were implementing CBR since the past 30 years. And these, in the same way as the UNCRPD, are very much grounded in the needs and requirements of persons with disabilities. So the objective of CBR guidelines is to support community-based inclusive development and for mainstreaming disability. It also aims to support stakeholders to meet the basic needs and enhance the quality of life for people with disabilities and their families. And it encourages stakeholders to facilitate the empowerment of persons with disabilities. Slide number 19. So in here, I have listed that the CBR booklets, there are 7 booklets, and they cover from the rights Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to now we have on how we can address the needs of people with disabilities during disaster situations. So there are 7 booklets in detail, and one can look at them online. What I would like to now talk about is the CBR matrix which in a nutshell explains to you what these guidelines are. So the CBR guidelines are vast and extensive, but this CBR matrix in a nutshell gives an overview, and it has very well articulated all that you all have shared, but in a more compact way. And what I heard from y'all is that a lot of these things that are already in here, y'all have tried to cover as per your understanding. So we are on the same wavelength. So the CBR matrix has 5 pillars that says health, education, livelihood, social, and empowerment. And each of these 5 pillars have indicators in the sense they indicate, not indicators in the sense of measuring, but they indicate the direction in which such programs can be developed. Now, it is important to understand here that we need not follow the CBR matrix as such, like you begin with health and then move to education. No, you can begin from any corner, any point. Maybe you can begin from forming disabled persons organizations, which if you see under empowerment is the last step. So any of these steps can be followed in any order, and you will reach the goal of enabling persons with disabilities live a dignified life. It all depends on the organization. It all depends on the ideology of the organization. As I said, in India, we are following all 4 models: charity, medical, social, and empowerment approach. So it depends on which ideology you come from, and as per your experience and your skills and capacity, you can begin from any point. So we begin, suppose we talk about education. So you begin from early childhood, that is early identification. And the first service providing agency in our services to the community is the Anganwadi. So we could see how many children with disabilities are actually there in the Anganwadi. Are they visiting them, or are home visits being made to these children through the Anganwadi to reach out to them? And in many cases, we have seen that if you do early identification, then it is very easy to provide the correct rehabilitation plan for that child with disability and easy integration within the community. So that is one example that I gave. There are several challenges at each of these levels. In fact, when I used to go to the field, I would never find any children with disabilities coming to the Anganwadi. So that is a major challenge, and then we will have to seek to working on community level issues like stigma, like beliefs that are there, the karma theory, to be able to bring children with disabilities out into the open. So if we see very few people with disabilities in and around us. Maybe if we are working on disability, yes, we will see many. But otherwise, if you just walk on a street, will you see people with disabilities around? No, because there are several barriers like access, like the confidence to be able to move out. So most of them have been given the role to stay in the home, and people with disabilities believe that it's okay for us to stay in the home. Then if you look at livelihood, if there is low education, if you don't work on the education arm, then you will not have many people with disabilities who are skilled enough, educated enough to come out into the general employment scenario. So you will have low participation rate even within the employment. And once you do not demand, once you do not come out, then the vicious circle of not providing for reasonable accommodation starts going on. So even if we take this assumption that not many people with disabilities have an education, and hence they are semi-skilled or unskilled. So the best opportunity for them is to maybe seek employment in MGNREGA. But even in MGNREGA, there is low awareness. There is low awareness that people with disabilities have been given certain jobs. They need not always be digging. There could be other jobs that could be given to them. And if this doesn't happen for often, naturally the community, the department, the line officials, they all get used to not providing reasonable accommodation. So demanding and accessing whatever entitlements that are there is equally important to sensitize. Sensitization cannot happen in the air. If I do not go out and seek work, and do not state that this is a reasonable accommodation I want, the other party may never learn to do it. So it works both ways. And since we have a high population that is uneducated, unskilled, semi-skilled, social protection and social security are very, very important. But if you study the pension amount that has been given to people with disabilities, some states 300, some states 400, it's a pittance amount. It cannot enable anybody to live a life with dignity. On the social model is very important, and somebody has already talked about recreation, sports. We also spoke about access to justice. I also gave the example of how personal assistance is important where we do not have full accessibility. So we have discussed this wing in the previous slides in our presentation. And now we come to empowerment. And there are lots of work that needs to be done on advocacy, on community mobilization. We also spoke about political participation. And what we did not speak about in depth is about self-help groups and organizations of persons with disabilities that are called DPOs, Disabled Persons Organizations. As I said, I know best what I want. So if I am not consulted, but if somebody else is consulted on my behalf, that person may have a different viewpoint and a different orientation. So that person may be able to identify a different set of priorities. Whereas if I am consulted, I will give a different set of priorities. So it is important to form persons with disabilities organizations and ask people with different impairments what they would want and what their requirements are and what their priorities are. So that is the, in a nutshell, the CBR matrix. So for community-based rehabilitation, we go to slide number 21. I have listed down some actions that we can...
Deepa, you can share your research material with them. So then you finish this and share material on that.
The material is there on the Unnati website, whatever research we have done. It may not be in the form of a theoretical article, but all the basic documents are there on Unnati website. Everything is there.
Okay, thank you.
Deepa, can you just share the website then, at least in the chat box?
Yeah, just a minute.
And use it.
It's unnati.org. You can go to publications and you can go under mainstreaming disability, and there are many publications on that. So then I will continue with my presentation. Slide number 21, actions to be taken at the micro, meso and macro levels. So what I have done is I have not tried to, put them in at the 3 different levels, because I think all these actions need to be done at all the 3 levels. So first, I think I came up with this, that we need to adopt a twin track approach, that there are existing organized institutions which need to be reformed. As we saw in the study, and even experience says that the condition of people with disabilities in this institution is deplorable. I think if you even try to visit any of them, you will get an idea that it is just a filthy place. People say they are worse than jails. And even people non-disabled women who take recourse to these shelters when they are facing domestic violence, they say it is better to face domestic violence than to be in this shelter. So you can imagine the condition, how it is. It is different to see that it's a study, which we saw in the previous slides, and I think somebody else had also presented. So one option is, and we need to work on till we are able to eliminate these institutions completely, is to try and reform these institutions. And the second way, of course, in a major way, how we can adopt community-based rehabilitation as a strategy. Now, this can be adopted by NGOs, and it needs to be adopted in a big way by the government. So unless it is government driven, we will not be able to reach out to most people with disabilities. Then is awareness. So we need to raise awareness, and I think a lot of you have mentioned this already in your chat. Then we need to conduct a disability census on prevalence. I think this is one of the major challenges, that if the WHO report says 15% and our census is saying 2%, there is a big gap. And we need to cover this gap, because budget allocations, our power, our voice will all be dependent on the actual prevalence. Then these institutions, mental health authorities as well as independent bodies such as National Human Rights Commissions regularly monitor the residential care institutions at the community level. So regular monitoring is very important. Influence in the government to design large-scale mental health programs. Preventive mental health programs is very important. We can go to the next slide. We need to, supportive mechanisms need to be built to enable persons with disabilities exercise their legal capacities. Then basic access to basic amenities that will ensure a hygienic facility, especially when during the pandemic, I think a lot of people faced issues in getting access to and maintaining the menstrual hygiene. So I think it is important that basic services reach people with disabilities. This, a lot of you have mentioned, training, sensitization and orientation of service providers like police, lawyers, elected representatives, and disability rights. So that is another thing. Slide number 23. This again I had mentioned about disability pension. So we need to advocate for a disability pension that is more dignified. We need to do large scale awareness on good touch and bad touch for women and girls with disabilities also, because the first step is that even people with disabilities do not know what is happening to them and how and what to do if something happens, if they are harassed sexually. So along with the other stakeholders, people with disabilities also need to be sensitized along with their parents. We move to the next slide, slide number 24. Here again, I have said that the emotional well-being of women with disabilities and their caregivers need to be addressed, because most of the time, the caregivers happen to be other non-disabled women in the family or even in the institution. And they get mentally stressed and anxious. So their mental health and well-being needs to be addressed. I had mentioned about data, but we also need to collect gender and disability sensitive data. We also need to plan and look at budgets with our disabled and gender friendly. Somebody has also mentioned about implementing all these acts, and within the act we have Disability State Commissioner, which in most places is absent or are like, parallel job responsibilities. Like in our state, we have the Principal Secretary who's also the Disability Commissioner. So many of the states have yet not enacted their RPD rules. The strategies on domestic violence on women with disabilities need to include the feedback from women with disabilities, as I mentioned, as to what and how they would like. You move to the next slide. It is important that even information is accessible to persons with disabilities in the formats that they would want. So work needs to be done on that. We have in Gujarat a set of rules for the management of the shelters, and these need to be probably adapted or in operational for other states which are disability inclusive. Of course, this argument is there that we do not want institutions, but this is like special education and inclusive education. Till we are able to integrate women with disabilities within the community and these institutions are there, some strategy we will have to think that will enable the management of these centers and some mechanism which enables their monitoring. As mentioned earlier, also we need to include DPOs in disability inclusive disaster risk reduction because their viewpoint is equally important. For me, it could be the priority that, I want XYZ facilities. But for a non-disabled person, it could be something else. And for a person who's working for me, it could be something else. So as the convention and the RPD Act and the WHO guidelines, they've all consulted people with disabilities. Similarly, for disaster risk reduction and management, people with disabilities need to be consulted, and more advocacy for inclusive guidelines need to be put in place. We go to slide number 26, where I've talked about how the other laws need to be harmonized with the UNCRPD and how these laws can enable women and children to live with dignity in the community. And lastly, I would like to say is that the RPD Act has made provision for 5% reservations in schemes and or poverty elevation and development schemes for people with disabilities. So what mechanisms need to be put in place in tracking whether this 5% reservation is being followed for all schemes and whether it has gender disaggregate data. Next slide. Yeah. So these are the references. So as far as I'm concerned, for deinstitutionalization, I have tried to present comprehensively what I thought would help you to understand this issue better. Are there any questions pertaining to that, or you would like me to talk more on research? I think time-wise we are up, so we can only take question answers.
They can send you the questions and maybe you can write the answers.
Yeah, it depends. If they are fairly long answers, then I may not be able to write them, Ashaji.
Nandini?
Is there anything specific anybody wants to ask? Then I can answer it.
Actually,
on research.
A lot of the material that you have talked about on the Unnati website, actually for the participants will be very helpful because it also talks about how research can be done in larger communities with disabled people. You know what we are talking about in terms of emancipatory research.
Yes.
What we are talking about in terms of sensitive research or voices from the grassroots to emerge, to
yes,
get into policy. So I think there's a lot of evidence that Deepa and Unnati have done, produced through these very grassroots level studies. And I think the issues that she was flagging in the end are a reflection of what has emerged from her work at the level of the grassroots. So in terms of research, actually, I think, Deepa, I mean, the questions would be probably around how did you maintain the, the quality of the evidence along with the sensitivity with of working with different groups of disabled people.
Okay, so see, we mostly work with people with disabilities, and wherever possible, we have tried to include them in the research design, wherever possible, as I said, because initially it may not be possible, but to consult with a draft design and to go and field test and see what works, because as I said many times, the viewpoints may vary. So the important step is to make a draft design and go and test it in the field and then come back and do it. And most of the time we were not doing research, which was research in the academic sense, which is quantitative, but we were doing a lot of qualitative research. So a lot of interviews, lot of discussions with the community, with separately with people with disabilities, with different stakeholders, and then try to bring on board all the viewpoints. So I think participatory research was Unnati's forte in any case since the beginning. So we followed the principles of participatory research, where you begin from the person is, where you tap into the local knowledge and local evidence. So the staff and the people who would be involved in the research are first trained and sensitized on the disability in depth before they even venture into the field. So a lot of time in the initial phase goes into this process. So does that answer?
Deepa,
yes.
Just a question that a few of the participants were asking the last couple of days is, about how do you represent the voices? So suppose you have, say, a child or an adult with intellectual impairment. How do you access their testimony? How would you, what is the voice of this person? Especially also with deaf people, this is another issue. I think these are the two groups along with people with psychosocial disabilities. These are the groups whose voices, how do you represent them, is a question that is emerging.
Okay, so I haven't done in-depth work with people with psychosocial disabilities, but if you read the DPO document that we did with Sightsavers and, I forget the name of the document, but it is basically on capacity assessment of DPOs, and we've done a lot of work with DPOs who are working with people with hearing impairment. So lot of these discussions we would have with the their sign language interpreters and exactly interpret what they are saying and write it down and again go back to them that this is what we have understood. Is it what you were trying to tell us? So a two-way dialogue process will help, is what I can say.
Thank you. If there are any other questions, but this is something I think a lot of us are still trying to grapple with, no?
Right. So a lot of work needs to go into working with people who are hearing impaired, even to explain the concepts to them. And I think Sanchar had a very innovative way of doing that. They were drawing some of the things and the concepts that we were trying to explain. Because OD is not, organizational development is not an easy thing for somebody who's hearing impaired to understand. So we created stories and a storyboard, and then that storyboard, so it was easy to follow. And we have to understand that people with hearing impairment do not follow long sentences. They don't have anything like grammar. So you have to hold on to the key word and then explain that, and then they get it. So of course it is an effort. It's like learning a new language. How much time we spend learning a new language. So we will have to learn a new language if we want to converse with a specific person with disabilities. It will not happen in one go.
Thank you, Deepa.
Yes, thank you. Are there any questions from the participants other than what you asked, Nandini?
I don't see anything in the chat box.
Yeah, if anybody wants to unmute and say something, please do. Any comments you want to say, any of your reflections? We still have 5 minutes. Anything that struck you from this discussion? We have people with hearing impairment on this list of participants, Nandini?
Sorry, I think Ashali or Rajsi will be able to say.
Okay.
I also think that one of the biggest problem facing us is that when we discuss issues of sexual violence against women with disabilities, to get what kind of questions to ask, how to ask them, these are still things that we still have not been able to grapple with fully.
Right, right. So with this organization that I told you in the beginning that we have started working, and they have been working on violence on women issues since long. Now, ordinarily, if you go to a community trying to identify people with disabilities, people are not going to share their issues specifically related to sexual harassment and violence. But this lady, within a month, she has come up with 5 cases, Asha ji. It is just amazing. I think it is the kind of rapport and image that you have in the community. So initially, you may have to do a lot of work to, for the community to identify with you, as they see you as what? Because this organization has been working on violence on women's issues since 15 years. So everybody recognizes them as an agency working on violence on women. And so when she started identifying people with disabilities, she just automatically started getting cases which are related to sexual harassment or violence on women with girls with disabilities. I think that is something which really works.
That is when you're working with communities, but when you're working with individuals, it becomes tougher.
Yeah, it becomes tougher, and I think a lot of trust and confidence building will have to be put into that. Those conversations, maybe longer time.
Thank you, Deepa, so much. This was really exhaustive and gave an insight into how things can work out in the field, but linking it also to the legal parts that are there that we have committed to.
Yes, thank you, Asha ji, for inviting me, and SMRC, Reena, Rajeshri, Nandini. And thank you to all the participants. I think because of this topic, I haven't spoken on this topic earlier, but it just gave me an opportunity to reflect and cull out all my insights. So thank you so much.